Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We start our session. Private versus public transport. I'm a chief editor of GAFU. This is the thing of my life, and this is the phenomena of our conference. So this is a pleasure to have your own car, a personal car. And we have a new trend, changing of urban environment, and this is aimed at eliminating this pleasure, and that's why here I am a counter person. I am against it. Hello. So, but nevertheless, I can't but say that transport, so personal and public. This is so this will be the end of it soon, and in the nearest future there will be unmanned vehicles mostly, and the concept itself will be changed. The concept of ownership will be changed, and automobile transport will not be like this as we know it for today. And the situation, I'm really I'm very enthusiastic about seeing what will happen today. I would like to see what future we'll have without vehicles, without cars. And today I'm really interested in what is going on today and what we'll have after elimination of cars. We have a short video, and it's prepared for this session, public versus private. This was prepared by the organizers.
Global traffic is growing as economies around the world. By 2040, nearly double the current number. Los Angeles tops the list as the world's most gridlocked city, with drivers stuck in traffic for over 100 hours a year. The future of urban mobility lies in reducing the use of private vehicles, improving public transport systems and infrastructure, encouraging car sharing, cycling and walking, as well as innovations such as driverless and electric vehicles. That's why some cities, such as Los Angeles and New York, have set specific goals for electric vehicles. In cities, using public transport is often the quickest way to get around, and it's good for the environment, especially when public buses and trains run on clean energy. Shenzhen became the first city to electrify 100% of its public buses. 5 years ago, Moscow started reforming its public transport system. Last year, the new Moscow Central line opened. The city's 14th metro line meets the highest environmental, technical and social standards and carried 30% more people than predicted. And it's not just the metro. Moscow's entire transport system has been refreshed. It now has the youngest bus fleet in Europe, over 200 kilometers of bicycle lanes, and a dynamic car-sharing market. Moscow also supports innovations. This winter, Russia's technology giant Yandex successfully tested a driverless taxi on the snowy streets. Difficult conditions for autonomous vehicles to navigate. Efficient urban transport systems are critical not only for city economies, but also for the well-being of their residents. So what can be done to ensure megacities are ready for a transport revolution?
So one more announcement before I announce the speakers. In the application of our event, there are interviews. You need to open up sessions, choose our session, and then there will be a proposed question to you. How did you get to Zareti Park? What did you use? Car sharing? Did you get on foot, by car, by taxi? So I got to this place on foot. So what about you? So this is the question to you. Please fill in this information, and then in the end we'll see the results. So our speakers, Mikhail Blinkin, this is Director of National Investment University of Moscow Economic University, Sky Duncan, Director on global projects of cities, National Association of Road Movement of the USA, Boris Golikov, managing partner on U-Drive company, Vadim Bogatil, partner of McKinsey, Philippe Roth, managing director of LLC Cities, and Roman Latipov, deputy head of Moscow Metropolitan. So now I would like to give the floor to Mikhail Yakovlevich. Mikhail Yakovlevich, please introduce us to the course of affairs and how will you see the future. That's very interesting. I will start from the ancient times. In cities of the world, 2,000 years ago, and New York, 1,000, for 1,000 inhabitants, there were 10 individual carriages. And that was only one reason for this. Individual carriage in ancient times, at the beginning of the 20th century, this is just a lot of horses and houses for horses. This is a luxury thing, to have a lot of horses. For the revolution was like this, a number of personal carriages immediately. So at the 20s increased. It was 200, 300 last year. I was in Auburn City, and they have 1,000 cars for 1,000 people. What is going on now? So what is happening today? It seems that 4th century, which gave remarkable possibilities of individual mobility, is going to its end. Now we have mobility 4.0. What is it? It means that public transport becomes more individualized, more customized. For example, in this gadget, I have schedules, routes. I have a question. How did I had the question. How did I get it? I used the bus 144. I got to Metropole Hotel. I got the badge, and then on foot I went to Zaryadye Park. I love cars, In spite of this fact, still I went on foot to Zaryadye Park. So personal transport becomes more cooperative, so to say. I don't use car sharing. I'm so conservative, but my young specialists, my young experts, my young colleagues, they use this every day. The next step of car sharing will happen. It already happened. It happened yesterday. But when I saw the first electromobile with the robot BMW, so it was 80s. Engineers said it would drive. Why did they do this for? They made it for this. So we have SEVE. This is car sharing, electrical vehicles, autonomous driving. So this is like abbreviation, SAIF. What is it? It's not a robot. For example, I found a car. It is somewhere near the memorial to Kirill Mefodий, and I just pressed the button, it went to me. So then I don't need a robot anymore because I can drive the car myself. This is the integration of sharing behavior and robotic techniques. So technically this is all solved. Only legal issues are left. So of course cities will not back to this norms, 10 personal carriages for 1,000 people. But this, now we have this 500 vehicles for 1,000, 800 vehicles for 1,000. It will be in the past soon. And public transport will not be public transport will be much more comfortable as it was before. And we have such a norm. that the public transport should not be humiliating. It should not be humiliated. It should not humiliate people. It should not be very crowded, very stuffy. When I was in this 144 bus, I could, read all the news on my gadget. Nobody pushed me. So this bus, 144, was wonderful. It was comfortable. So this public transport today is very good. Thank you very much. And now it's quite logical to ask another question. So what is important for people? So Vadim Pokatilov, maybe you will answer this question. So we heard several versions. How do you perceive the situation? What is important for people in this under these modern conditions with these different modes of transport? Please take the mic. Does it work now? So, as Mackenzie, we conducted, a large-scale research in 24 cities of the world. It was dedicated to comparison of these 24 metropolises from the point of view objective indicators and also subjective perception of citizens. We made quite a big research. We made a geoanalytics ourselves. We asked the same question. We asked many people the same question, and we also attracted a lot of experts. As a result, we made several conclusions, and these conclusions can be applied to different cities. What is important for people? Here you can see what is important. You can see one axis, what is important for people, and which is lower the axis, this is what is really more important for citizens. But the main function of transport is safety. So safety is a priority, number one. Then efficiency. Efficiency means how quickly and how reliable I am using public transport versus personal. Then ecology, financial accessibility, and comfort. So this is what people await from public transport and personal transport. Now, how are you satisfied with these factors? That was the second question. People globally around the world were not satisfied with these people which were very important for them. So people are quite skeptical because physical safety and ecology, financial accessibility of public transport. So these issues, are not satisfactory for people. And also, people don't like to pay too much money for personal transport. This is not only characteristic for Singapore or London. So we had a research in 24 metropolises, and it was like general information. Okay, what is more satisfactory and less satisfactory for people in cities, public or personal transport? So in all practically cities of the world, people are satisfied by public transport much more than by personal transport, and this is for all cities. So this is relevant for all cities, and there are only 5 cities in which people say that they are really satisfied by personal transport. This is Shanghai, Hong Kong, London, Singapore, and in these cities, there are tough restrictions on using of personal transport. This is paid entrance auctions on ownership of number plate, and also a number of cars in the city. Only in these cities where there are so many restrictions, people are satisfied with private transport. Now, next question. What is more important for Moscow? And what can we say about Moscow? We can start with this. During last 7 years, Moscow had made a very huge, leap. Moscow was so overcrowded. It had so many traffic jams. But now, it went to the 6th place in our rating. In our rating, Moscow took the 6th place, so speaking about 2010, Moscow could be only at the 20th place in this year, at the level of Bangkok. But now Moscow is at the level of Chicago, Madrid, and such other cities like New York.
Accordingly, this is reflected by many awards that we got, and here we decided that was pretty good rating for Moscow and other cities, but for such cities as Singapore still have room for improvement. They get their value of about 63% of 100% total. So each city has a room for improvement. And now here's another question. Where do you develop and where can you do something? And we made this chart for every city. How do you read it? For each criteria, and for Moscow, you give the comparison of some objective rankings, light blue, then dark blue, where the citizens are satisfied, and orange, whether the citizens are satisfied with changes. And the satisfaction with changes for Moscow is very high. It's ahead of all those 20-something cities. Objectively, residents believe that situation is changing for the better, and it's much stronger than any other city that we studied. At the same time, there are some challenges that still remain. Some of these challenges are quite objective. For example, for rail transport, we did a lot. We built the Moscow Circle Line, we developed our metro, but we're still behind many cities. That's why this mayor's program is quite logical. We want to almost triple heavy-duty rail-based transport. But there are some subjective criteria where Moscow is in a pretty good position compared with other cities, but people tend to underestimate it. Everything has to do with transport accessibility. Objectively, transport in Moscow is quite inexpensive in terms of percentage of people's income, but at the same time, people believe they're paying too much and it's too expensive. That's one of the communication issues that we have. Another objective challenge that we face in the next 5 years is to continue improving efficiency of personal transport and improving environmental values of the transportation system in general. Moscow has reached some objective values, increasing the share of public transport by 10% from 62 to 68 in 10 years. It's unprecedented. It may seem small, but there are only a few cities who could achieve that in the decade. The road congestion index, it is still a problem, but it decreased significantly. In the past, we were the most congested city in the world. Now this index of 44% is at the level of London. In London is one of the cities where people believe where everything is okay with personal transport. We had a separate survey from Moscow, and we see fairly high satisfaction numbers. But of course, we have challenges. Our main challenge is about increasing the number of cars in the city, especially in the belt around Moscow, something that Mayor spoke about at the plenary session, and that's the big challenge for the transportation system of Moscow. All these new residential buildings that are built 30 kilometers away from Moscow, there are no good transportation solutions there yet. And it's a challenge that we expect to face in the next 5 to 10 years. There are no jobs there in the suburbs, not too many new jobs. And here we can also see trends that are actively implemented in other cities, developing pedestrian streets, streets for bicycles, fully shutting down the movement for cars in certain areas, and also mobility as a service. And some time in the future, we will only be able to use mobile applications, other services like car sharing, car pooling, minivan pooling, regulatory restrictions for car owners. The whole trend is moving in that direction, and many cities that are efficient in terms of using personal transport, they went that way. Yes, this is the so-called territorial or space development, especially in terms of suburbs of Moscow, and also electric vehicles, all these things that change cities, and Moscow shouldn't be lagging behind there, as it is not lagging behind in other areas. Thank you. My next question goes to Philip Road. All this story about dependency of transport changes on what changes in the city. You cannot change the city without changing its transport city, and vice versa. Philip, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And I would like to share 3 main points to kick us off from my end. And they are all more generic. They don't relate to one specific city. And the first one you mentioned already. This session is about transport revolutions, and we cannot separate transport revolutions from urban transformation. Together, the two, the city transformation and the transport system revolution, produce accessibility. And accessibility is what we ultimately want. And this is really important because it's so obvious, and at the same time, in most cities, it's disrespected again and again and again. The city in itself is a transport solution, a transport machine. You need to think about urban form, co-location, how urban functions are situated. We have just heard about the suburbs. So this is key. We have a choice. We can offer accessibility across a spectrum of combinations of transport systems and urban form. On the one hand, compact, connected cities which are served by mass rapid transit and active travel, but we also can do it by car-oriented agglomerations. It does work. There are many cities that do this, based on suburban houses and business parks. So that's the first thing. And technology at the moment is disrupting this equation, and we need to be very aware of what we're doing. The second observation is that the moment we are discussing transport at this very point, we need to accept that everything is incredibly contradictory. Yes, we seem to, in the urban field, agree that we're leaving the car behind, but the reality is that we are still in the midst of an excessive expansion of motorization worldwide, with growth rates in many countries in the world which we haven't seen before. We also know that the car-oriented society simply costs too much, and the car-oriented city doesn't deliver in social, economic, environmental terms. It's completely accepted. We also have a lot of progressive transport policy, yes, and cities have been turned around. But still, and particularly national state policy, in the end, is heavily subsidizing the car system, and often for many other reasons than providing access, mainly around the economy and providing jobs. But also, let's not kid ourselves. There are many mayors at this conference that still on a daily basis commission flyovers, build highways, alongside, yes, cycle hire and the rest of it. That's a schizophrenia I don't think we can afford in the future. Now, third point, and as we move into the next generation transport technology, as Bruce Katz referred to it on the panel, this will require an even more proactive, more progressive engagement and ultimately choices than in the past decades. This is not going to be a happy story by default, simply because, autonomous vehicles and sharing, the market will solve it. No, cities will have to take a very active position. We have to bring together the public and private debate with issues about shared and active transport. We need to accept that better cars cannot solve the urban transport problem. You can make them as good as you want. You're not going to deal with the ultimate problem around space. And this question about public versus private is in some ways a rhetorical choice, because if we think about what's the primary asset a city has, it's publicness. And that publicness needs to also be honored in the context of transport, for many reasons, not just the cultural story, but the capacity story. So now moving ahead, there are a couple of smart mobility challenges which we really need to confront head on. First of all, we cannot accept that there are apolitical technological fixes which emerge out of Silicon Valley or out of Shenzhen, which don't engage with the political realities these technologies imply. We have been too much wedded to solutionism, of talking about end states of what technology could do in the end, forgetting about the process, getting from A to B, and the social pain this may, in many cases, involve. We need to talk more about the space consumption of different transport modes. That's the #1 measure in terms of urban quality of life. We need to integrate public and shared mobility systems when rolling out mobility as a service. We have to have a really serious conversation about travel speeds at the surface in cities, in roads. The travel speeds will determine what kind of technology we need when we move towards autonomy. It's entirely different if we want to have 100 kilometers vehicles go autonomous versus 20 kilometers per hour. And we need to have a real conversation about vehicle design. It cannot be that we're rolling out shared systems, bike hire schemes, more pedestrian space, when at the same time the car industry sort of luring the consumer into 2-ton vehicles, SUVs, trucks, which ultimately do the opposite to what we're trying to achieve in our cities. Car design really needs to be considered as a central element of urban design, and it's these machines which need to be better understood from an urbanistic perspective. Now, more generally, we have a lack of understanding what it means to transition from one of these equilibria of urban and transport planning to a new one. And as I said, the considerable pain that this shift will bring with it. These pains are often outside the transport system. They are related to the employment our taxi industry is affected with, the car industry itself is affected with. We don't take that seriously, and if we don't understand the implications, it's going to be a very difficult battle. We need to prepare for the unexpected. 2 years ago, no one anticipated the revolution in cycle hire, station-free cycle hire, which came out of East Asia, now transforming many cities, and having, for the first time, reduced car use in places like Beijing and Shanghai. No one predicted this. How can we deal with uncertainty? We need to engage in the politics of algorithms. It's not technology. It is the political story behind these technological decisions, and our political leadership will have to engage with what these algorithms imply, and they need to be explained. We need to talk about the speed of change. How quickly do we really want to transition towards a new regime? How quickly can we make sure that society will embrace change? In Europe, we have, in many instances, overwhelmed change, and societies are pushing back. You may have heard of the term bike-lash, as in backlash against some of the very radical and very good radical transport cycling interventions. They need to be explained better. And ultimately, the role of the state must not be forgotten. There's a question about whether we, instead of a lot of piecemeal, need to shift towards an Apollo-like program for urban mobility. I'll finish now on going back to the first principle. Transport accessibility is all about producing better cities. That's the ultimate measure we need to engage with. Better cities, good physical configurations that allow for access is how we need to test all our transport innovations in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Roth. Thank you. Ms. Duncan, it will be easy if we design our cities from the scratch. It will be definitely, wouldn't it? But you guys have to rearrange existing places that already exist. So what are the challenges and opportunities in doing so?
Sure. And actually I've got a presentation, so I'll grab the clicker if that's okay. And I realize my head is in the middle of the screen. I'm sorry. I'll try and duck down. So I'm going to give the interpreters a bit of a headache, I think, because I'm going to whiz through a lot of very visual slides. But it's really the perspective that I'm hoping to take. I know you guys have incredible subways and metros here, both in St. Petersburg, I was there yesterday, and here in Moscow. But I'd like to talk about the revolution of transportation from the streets perspective. And we often forget, right, that our streets are our largest network of public space, and we've been doing a pretty bad job all around the world in how we design that. So it's really looking at how we can be more efficient about that space and make use of its value. For decades, it's insane. We have been designing our urban streets as places like this, right? We have forgotten that we as human beings are at the heart of our cities. We haven't given people space in our cities. And we've created environments where people have to risk their lives on a daily basis to go to work or to go to school. We've created speedways that invite drivers to use our streets like a racing track. and we're our most vulnerable users. Sadly, devastating. I have an entire collection of photos like this from around the world where our most vulnerable users have to battle off with our vehicles. So we've seen this time where our streets have taken our time, they've taken our air, they've taken our well-being, and all too often our streets have actually taken our lives. We're at the point now globally where 1.3 million people are dying every single year on our streets. That's the same as one person every 30 seconds, right? Think about it. Somebody's child or friend or family. You guys in Russia, you're not the worst in the world, but you've got a long way to go as well, and we all do, and this is part of what we're trying to work on around the world. Our work is through the Bloomberg Philanthropies Initiative for Global Road Safety, led by Jeanette Sadiq-Khan, who some of you may know. She used to run the transportation agency in New York City. And one of our big projects has been to provide better guidance for people around the world to design streets. So we build off a lot of the national work, and then we released a couple of years ago a global street design guide to really give people a blueprint of how to do this. We've worked with experts from over 40 countries and 70 cities to really look at how do we provide a product that can inspire leaders, be technical enough to inform practitioners, but also empower communities in an accessible way. And it's about, to your question, how do we ask, the bulk of our cities are already built, right? So how do we transform and ask what's possible of how we transform those spaces? For too long, the car has been our king, right? And we've forgotten about human beings. So we go with the premise of inverting that pyramid and now putting people on top and thinking about our most vulnerable users. We were thrilled to have Mike Bloomberg launch this and make it sponsor it as a free PDF a couple of years ago. And we've now had mayors from over 35 cities around the world put their name towards this approach of a people-first design. No one in Russia yet, sadly, but we'll see how we go. We're also really excited to be working on translations in Spanish and Portuguese and Chinese. We've had one of the guides translated into Russian, so we'll see. Let's see. Maybe this is kind of a mock-up slide, but let's see if we can end up with this in Russian as well. But the idea is to really look at the needs of all the different people, right? The needs of pedestrians and cyclists, people taking transit, yes, those who drive occasionally, but also our freight operators and service providers, and thinking about our streets as places for business. And, you know, Philip mentioned this idea of space, right? We're all being faced with congestion. And so one of the key things we have to remember is that personal car use is our least efficient way of using our streets, right? And actually we can move way more people. If I duck my head, I think you're missing half the slides. If we think about cycling and mass transit and even walking. So the space it takes to move 50 people, right? Or 50 Ubers, or 50 AV, right? We have to make decisions as people shaping cities whether we want to continue moving people like this, or do we take a multimodal approach, right? And we can see very quickly that the very same dimension of street can be redesigned to move 2.5 times as many people almost overnight. So, you know, I know here in Russia you're making great strides with the bike facilities and the new transit, but I also saw earlier this year that you're still named as the second worst city for traffic, right? So again, we've got a long way to go. In the guide, again, just clicking very quickly, but we really try and take existing conditions and show what's possible with that type of transformation, and then a whole number of case studies with metrics to show where people have actually done this. Giant grand streets that can be transformed to move more people, be greener, to clean our air and be safer, like in Buenos Aires in Argentina. Or tiny little pedestrian-only streets, where again, I know you've done this here, where cars are removed, and we see this in our kind of poster city children like Copenhagen. Also here in Moscow, which I'm excited to explore in the next few days. So as Philip mentioned, actually, we've proactively seen this done, right? These transformations haven't dropped out of the sky magically. City officials and designers have made conscious decisions to do things differently. And it's exciting to see all over the world, from the bus infrastructure in New York, piloting new transit streets in Toronto, small moves like traffic calming strategies in Mexico, or incorporating art and really bringing people back into the street, like in Santiago. Rethinking our riverfronts and waterways. This would be great here just outside this space, right? We've got a great move with this transformation of this park. What if we then also took over the waterfront? Or entire highway legs in New Zealand, I am biased, I'm from New Zealand, where they painted them hot pink and turned them into bike lanes. And I know we've been working on plazas here as well. So it's great to have the guidance, but of course we now work with technical cities around the world, with city governments to actually implement these projects and change policies. So we see overnight, literally showing traffic engineers in Mumbai how things can be done differently, or in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, how intersections can be transformed to be safer for everybody. Sao Paulo in Brazil, transformed again in a matter of 72 hours, working with the community. And this one I wanted to talk about to close, because this was in the north of Brazil in a city called Fortaleza, where this neighborhood had no heart to it, and we saw it really was a car park, and we worked with the local community in the city to transform this space, and we saw we could shift the hierarchy of who we give the space to by where we draw our lines. We could transform the spaces literally overnight to make them safer, to give families places to sit down and sit in the shade and enjoy and go out and teach their children to ride a bicycle. We then worked with them to see what they liked, and what was fascinating was this was a 15-day project that then got overwhelming approval. People loved the transformation. The local business owners even went out and petitioned to make this permanent, and it's now becoming a permanent program in the city. And these children were so desperate for somewhere to play. You can see we are literally still painting. The paint is wet, and these kids are out there leaping on our streets and on their new streets, and the expression on this face is pretty amazing of this young girl. And you know, this little boy here, we explained to him, we were painting in the middle of the night, and he's running from one side of the street, right, from here to here, and he was so excited. And then we said to him, oh, you know what, tomorrow night, when we're finished with this, you're going to be able to run from here to there and back with no cars. And I'll see, maybe they can hit play. It's just a 5-second reaction. This was his reaction. So like, you can go from there to there.
Да, можно пробежать туда.
Yes, you can run from one place to another one without any cars.
Incredible to remind ourselves, and Rem Koolhaas brought this up, right? Tech is all great. Yes, it's going to be here, but this is fundamentally about us as human beings living our lives in our cities. And so our hope is that these tools can provide, an opportunity to reinvent and reimagine our streets and our cities. And our challenge to you, my challenge to you, is to endorse it and ask for it and demand it and design it. If you have the money in the audience, then fund it, and just go out and do it. Look at this transformation revolution as a space to put people first and be the safe and sustainable street superheroes of the future. And then together, we can look at changing streets to change the world. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And so before I will give the floor to Boris Gorgi, I would like to say that Ms. Danko spoke a lot about safety, and car sharing for me, this is one of the issues so car sharing does not solve safety issue and does not solve cultural issue, and these are two major problems in my view. This is a big thing. So car sharing is a big innovation, but still these two problems exist with car sharing. Boris, I would like to ask you the question, how do you evaluate transport changes in Moscow and metropolises? Please, red button. Thank you for the question. Answering this question, I can reply, I disagree with you regarding safety, because our company monitors very actively how our users drive vehicles. We made a special project which is called School of Polite Driving. and all our telemetric equipment scans driving and everything is evaluates speed and acceleration, and after each drive a certain score is given, and then the score also is reflected by these. This is our interest as well. We need to minimize car crashes, of course. So that's why we try to make it the best possible safe way. So that's why I would like to say that we are making giant work, and in particular the Department of Transport. They give us great possibilities for car sharing services, and we see that there is a remarkable demand for this. We are registered, 300,000 users. We have 300,000 users. Each car makes 8 trips per day, 40 minutes each. So car is never idle. Cars are never idle. And this is, of course, this influences favorably on reduction of traffic, because parking places are free with car sharing. And we go in one direction, I mean commercial part and social interest. And this demand for car sharing so creates us a possibility to open our technological platform for investments. And today we offer our platform for owners of any fleet or any entrepreneurs who just want to participate in this growing market as car sharing. As I understand, Moscow has the biggest fleet of car sharing vehicles, about 13,000. We can see that only in Moscow it can double even today. So this is explainable. Parking costs a lot. If you work in the center, of course, it costs an arm and a leg to park a car for 8 hours or for 10 hours. And the reform of road pavement allows us to create new services on the basis of electrical electrical theft. For example, we launched another project on lease of electrical bicycles, and there was a colossal queue for registration. This is a very interesting service. People choose other modes of transport over their private cars, and they pay for 1 minute of use, for each minute of use. So this is regarding car sharing in Moscow. Thank you very much. Now, Roman Latipov, our next speaker, deputy head of Moscow subway. So this is, interesting, line between the public and personal. Can you speak about this in synthesis? What is personal? What is a private car? Why people say private vehicles? We defined 3 things. It's always accessible. It's always at your disposal. And then secondly, it's always ready for a drive, for trip. You don't have to buy a ticket or something. You have your license. You don't have to buy anything additional. And thirdly, of course, it gives you some comfort. Everything is at your disposal. Now nobody disturbs you. I'm just here alone enjoying myself. Regarding subway, all public transport on the whole as well, I will mention about it. Public transport is also becoming more private, even more private than a private car. It becomes more and more private. What do I mean here? So the first thing, so the car is always accessible. But on the other hand, we have a subway, and for many people, it's even more accessible than a private car.
It's often quicker to go down to the subway than reach your personal car. We also had some studies. Every new station that we open increases traffic by 6.4 thousand people per day, 6.5 thousand people per day. We didn't have them in the past. They don't change from other stations. These are new passengers who came to Moscow Metro. They left their personal car behind, and they came to use Metro. And for these 4.6 thousand people, Metro is more personal now than their own car. In the last several years, 303,000 people chose Metro. They switched from their personal car, and that's more personal and more convenient to them than a car. My second idea, when we talk about this fact that the personal car is always ready to go, you don't have to choose your tariff, you don't have to buy your ticket, but we do a lot as well to turn Metro or public transport in general into that kind of personal transport. All new ticketing menus, we have keychains and bracelets and whatnot. You don't have to choose a ticket. You can go to your Metro stop by bus, and then you have your smart Troika card that will select your optimal 90-minute tariff for you. And that's another card that we did together with St. Petersburg as we prepared for the World Cup. This is something that works both in Moscow and St. Petersburg. And it's like having a car in all these cities. It certainly doesn't work on your personal car. The third point in favor of personal transport, they say it's comfortable, but this is what we keep improving as well. On our trains, it's often more comfortable than in your personal car, especially considering the time you spend in traffic jams. You have smart lighting. You can go from the first car to the end car, like a throughput ability, and we have mobile device charging in our Metro cars, and it's sometimes more comfortable than moving in your personal vehicle. There are certain qualities that Metro has and that personal vehicles don't have at all. And in other words, Metro becomes more personal than your car, and that's your freedom of movement. If you use your car, you have to park it. Even if you even if you are able to find your parking space, then you go for a walk. You have to return to your car. After this beautification program downtown, on weekends, there was 12% increase of passenger traffic in the city center. Those are the people who came to the city center for recreational purposes. 83% of those people who came downtown for recreational purposes, they use different metro stations to come and go. They find it comfortable to arrive to one station and then leave the city center using another station. And otherwise, if they came by their personal cars, they would have to return to their vehicle. They would be less free. And now, after we introduced or are going to introduce a couple of new metro diameters and the bigger circle line, they will get new opportunities. They will have more convenient options that with their own personal car. We had 5,000 people, including 800,000 English-speaking helpers who help people deal with their problems, starting from helping them find their route, or if they lost their passport, or if they want to know where Lenin Mausoleum is. And now we have information desks where personnel speaks different languages and they're willing to help people. And we say to our employees, your passenger is your guest. You are a host, hosting these people, welcoming them. And in a personal car, of course, you can use your automatic navigator, but you cannot ask for directions anybody. And that's why, in a sense, metro is more personal than your personal vehicle. You can be online, you can get connected, and when you drive a vehicle, you have to watch the road, even if you are online. When you are on a metro train or on a bus, you can always be online. 1.3 million people last year, all unique users is what we had. Those people downloaded 37 petabytes data, 37 million gigabytes, and it confirms my point. People want to be connected, and they wouldn't be able to do that if they had been in their vehicles, and they can do it in the metro. We will be turning metro into a more personal mode of transport than your personal car. I hope you got my point. In reality, I learned my lesson today about how you are going to compensate the reduction of time I spend in my personal car. But one thing I have not heard from any of you is how you can compensate to me the pleasure of driving. That's probably a topic for a later discussion. We have a very short time for Q&A discussion. And Mikhail had a question to Ms. Duncan. Let's start with that. I enjoyed watching your photos of cities where you are going to transform the streets, but I have a question of an old city planner. In every city, you have very different meanings of land allocated to streets. In the US, in Canada, in Australia, this is 30-35% land allocated to streets. We are in a Russian city where land allocated to street is 10%. How your recommendations could be applied equally in the city where there are many streets or few streets. When I have 10%, there is nothing to transform besides some main streets nearby. Thank you.
That's a wonderful question, and I think that's context that we're seeing like that all over the world. And I would say it actually puts more pressure on every square centimetre of space and how we use that in our cities. So absolutely, we need to find ways to move people around, and all of our cities around the world have a different percentage of their total land area given to streets. We obviously need to make sure we can still cater for emergency vehicles and police movement and a lot of our kind of fundamental safety. But what we're finding actually is if we have to move more people on less space, think about it like real estate, right? When we count every little square centimetre or metre or inch of space and put a value on that, then we have to make a decision, right? So if we go back to that capacity diagram, and we make a call. What do we do with that space? If we want to give it all to individual drivers, then we can't move as many people. We can't manage as much stormwater. We can't deal with urban heat island effect. We can't deal with as much well-being. So we have a decision. I'm certainly not saying we should never have any cars in any part of our cities, but it's a decision that we have to make in an informed manner of how we use that space. So I would say if we have less space in our city in total given to streets, then it only puts more pressure on what we do with that space and how we distribute that geometry to most equitably serve our citizens and our cities.
Good, thank you. И у меня есть вопрос к мистеру
And I have a question to Mr. Rode.
quite understand how car can affect the city design, yes? But do you have a clear, simple example how the city design affect vehicle design?
No, and that's the point. The problem is that there is currently no one who would, in a very honorable way, consider him or herself as a vehicle designer in one of the big automotive companies, even thinking that his or her remit is to think about the design of the city. That's not the proposition, that's not the job description. And that's one of the biggest problems we are facing. If you have a job description related to public transport technology, most certainly, if you do trains for my colleague to the right, they will have to think about Moscow as a city system. A vehicle designer, even in the most innovative automotive industry sectors, has no clue about how the city functions. They know all about speed, consumer preference, about interior sound, experience, marketing, consumer preference, but they don't know anything about cities.
Thank you very much. Давайте теперь попросим.
Now let's show results of our voting. And while we are looking at the screen, I have a quick question to Boris. You are proud of having compact vehicles in your fleet. You have many smart vehicles. What's the point of that, where everything in big cities is marked for much bigger cars? What's the point of making car-sharing cars smaller? That's going back to that conversation about car design. All manufacturers in vehicles, there's certain unification. These are not the cars that we had in the past. Today we have a unified platform with many manufacturers. The next stage, all transmissions and engines will be replaced by electric motors, and then many differences will be erased. As for smarts that we open for cities, it's a more comfortable type of vehicles. You can park it easier, and we believe that the city should be reducing parking spaces, the way I understand it. Let's see how this will be developing, but in any case, we understand for the city, a compact car is more convenient anyway. Thank you very much. This is the end of our session. Thank you for choosing our session. I'd like to thank all the visitors and our speakers.
How is life? I've been promoting this a lot, but yeah, much liked in India at the moment.